Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonicist. I've had a cracking half hour before we've even started recording. We've just been having a chat and a giggle about various things, more of which will become apparent over the course of this interview. We're talking about Waterloo tourism today, both historic and contemporary, as we gear up for a series of features looking at the Battle of Waterloo / La Bataille de la Belle Alliance / whatever you want to call it, because everyone's got a different name for the wretched thing. I am joined by two brilliant people who have been on the show before. I have Gareth Glover with me, who, frankly, if you don't know about the works of Gareth Glover, you've been living under a rock. And haven't even tried to read a book relating to this period. Let's focus on Waterloo content, shall we? I don't even know how many volumes it is now of the Waterloo archive. I think it's something like 20, but I've lost count. I wish I had them all. I just keep picking them up when I see them. To say nothing of Waterloo in 100 Objects, Waterloo Myth and Reality, which if you're ever going to read a single volume on Waterloo and you want to blow apart some certain things related to the battle, go read that. Gareth, great to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you very much, and thank you for the intro.
That's all right. I'm hoping that my check for the advertising will be in the post in due course.
Absolutely.
That is a joke, people. I don't take commissions for people to appear on this podcast. Mainly because nobody would pay me if I tried to. But I'm also joined by Kristine Hughes Patrone. Kristine was on a little while back because I was waxing lyrical about her book Waterloo Witnesses, which is just brilliant. I sang high praises for Gareth's book just now, but in terms of taking the civilian perspective and thrusting that front and center of the narrative, which is something that has been utterly neglected until very recently, it's peerless. So people, for all that I laud Gareth's works, just go and buy the book. Seriously, it's published by Pen and Sword. There'll probably be a link in the description or something. It's a fantastic read. Kristine, great to see you. Welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm fine. All the better for seeing you and Gareth.
Ah, such charming.
Two of my favorite men.
I wasn't expecting that when I hit the record button, but there we go. We'll take the compliments, won't we, Gareth?
Absolutely.
Right. So why are we here? Well, Kristine and Gareth have paired up to do some touring, and specifically touring of Waterloo. There are going to be details about this both later on in the episode and in the show description. So underneath, wherever you're viewing this, there will be a descriptor. There'll be a link within that where you can click through to find out all about their tour. This is quite an exciting partnership because, as I've just said, you've got Gareth, who's done all this stuff about the soldier experience, myth and reality, and then you've got Kristine, who intimately understands the civilian perspective. So you put the two together and you've got a complete appreciation, not just of the military facet, but also of the society element as well, which kind of interlinks and often gets pushed to the side. So we'll talk about USPs and so on in due course. But this being the Napoleonicist and being history, I want to talk about trips to the Waterloo battlefield up until now, first of all. So we'll start delving into the history. And the obvious place to start is a certain trip to the area that went on to be key to the reason that we had a battle at Waterloo in the first place. You know, that decision to fight there to defend Brussels. What do we know about Wellington's surveying of the land prior to the 18th of June? Because if I've got this right, he's there more than once.
He certainly is. Well, basically, the main visit is in August 1814. We can actually find him. General Clinton actually mentions him actually picking out the battlefield at Waterloo, amongst others. He does visit a number of times, and in fact is mentioned again having been there a week or so before Waterloo happened. So he was regularly looking at possibilities, although there were other sites he looked at as well, because clearly it wasn't clear that that was going to be his choice of ground. He may not have that choice.
Completely. I mean, this is the point, isn't it? That part of the reason that the Waterloo position works is because Napoleon's in that vicinity and hasn't, you know, kind of gone for Mons and then tried something of an outflanking maneuver. You know, standing at the Mont Saint-Jean position would have made no sense whatsoever if Napoleon had thrust towards Ghent, for example. Let's talk about some of those other positions, though. What do we know about other places that he was considering?
From Wellington himself, you don't get masses of information, unfortunately, which would be great if we did. You get hints from other people. One of the great sources for this is actually an artilleryman, Fraser, spelt with a Z, who actually writes a number of letters at this time during the actual operations. So they're actually brilliant for giving us up-to-date understanding of what's going on. And he mentions specifically another position between Leuze and Mons, which is actually to the northwest of Mons, which was clearly to actually cover that possibility of a movement more to the west, which is really where Wellington expected things to happen. There are also hints of a position just to the south of Nivelles, which was, of course, his original position for sort of getting his troops together in the situation that actually arose on the 15th and 16th of June.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that that position absolutely is not Quatre Bras by any sense of the imagination. We could kind of go down the rabbit hole of why, you know, the Nivelle plan kind of falls apart, but we won't, because there are other elements that we should look at. And one of those, just whilst we kind of pay homage to your myth busting work, this whole thing about Wellington's position being chosen for him is complete rubbish. It's a fabrication. Am I right?
Yeah, no question of it. Yeah, it only comes out in later letters that people start claiming other officers actually had something to do with it. But, you know, I mean, Kristine, I'm sure you'll agree with this. Wellington did not allow other people to choose his battlefields for him on any occasion.
No, he didn't allow them to choose much. So why would he leave the battlefield to them?
Exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't make sense that the position that is claimed to have actually been, you know, possible as well, because the La Belle Alliance Ridge, if you look to the south of that, is not particularly easily defended in comparison with the ridge that was chosen with the three sets of farmhouse fortresses, if you want to call, which was part of his whole intention to actually sort of make it a very difficult front to actually attack. So,
you know, what was interesting to me, Gareth, when I was writing the book, is all the instances of what Wellington was doing before the Duchess of Richmond's ball. You know, and the big myth about the ball is that Wellington was surprised, had no idea what Napoleon was doing until, you know, Gordon or somebody ran into the ball and said, "Oh my God, you know, he's at the gates."
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Delancey and all the other ADCs and secretaries had spent the entire day getting orders out to all the regiments, putting everybody in place. Wellington was not surprised.
No, although I would say that, he was still hedging his bets. He wasn't certain that the attack was the real attack. And he still felt that there was a chance that this was actually to put him off guard while a real attack comes through the Mons Road. So he does put forward orders. He starts getting the troops together, but he is not 100% certain about going for it until he gets further messages to confirm that, it really is happening.
Correct. But I think a lot of people are under the impression that he had no idea about anything until the Duchess of Richmond's ball, which is a huge fallacy.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, he was fully up to date with what was going on. What was not certain at that point was actually how serious an attack it was, whether it was
or exactly where it would take place.
The inclination to just reach for the popcorn and let you two continue in this vein for the next hour and a half is incredibly tempting, but I suppose I should do my job as editor of this show and host and start steering us towards kind of the tourism element. But it's worth saying that the first visitors to the battlefield, once the battle is over, aren't tourists. They are wives and sweethearts looking for loved ones, or they're scavengers looking for loot. And in fact, we've got instances of the battle not being over and scavengers looking for loot and actually being horrifically wounded and killed in the process. So
look at poor Freddie Ponsonby laying there horrifically wounded. And, he was looted, I think, 2 or 3 times before they took him off the field. And the last person who came, he said, you know what, I have nothing left. So you might as well just go on your way because I have nothing more to give you. And what's interesting about Freddie Ponsonby is Gareth knows I have a soft spot for old Freddie, who, by the way, was Caroline Lamb's brother. At one point, he's still out in the field. It's the next day. And a French officer comes up to him. And he says to the French officer, I'm one of Wellington's men. If you could send word to him that I'm here, they'll come and get me. And he says, well, the Frenchman says, well, I have to worry about my wounded first, but I'll try to get word to him. And here, have some brandy, and puts a jacket under his head and tries to make him as comfortable as possible. Decades later, they happen to be at the same party. And they start talking about their wartime reminiscences and, what happened to me, what happened to you. And it turns out it's the Frenchman who gave him so much comfort on the day after the battle. So how serendipitous is that? Absolutely. You know this story, right, Gareth?
Yeah. As you say, I mean, it's a famous incident, and obviously it was written up numerous times. But for the average soldier on the battlefield, it was not perhaps such a nice time. I mean, because officers got a little bit better treatment, should we say. Your average soldier was more likely to have his throat cut so they could actually take whatever valuables he had. And a number probably did have that happen to them. It was a very brutal night, should we say. And obviously the whole issue of trying to get these thousands and thousands of wounded off the battlefield. Well, we know that it took up to 4 days for some of these people to be removed to get to a hospital. Many bled to death on the field. So it was pretty horrific. But you're right. Yeah. I mean, as soon as the battle was over, or even before the battle was over, wives and loved ones were searching for their partners if they hadn't found them, to try and find either whether they were still alive or whether they were dead, and to help them if possible. So yeah, there was something there right from the start on both sides. The positive side of trying to help loved ones, and also those who are out there just literally to steal and take everything they possibly could, and murder if necessary to do so.
And there are many instances also of people anticipating how chaotic the battlefield was going to be with the removal of the dead and wounded. And so if they buried their friend or their commander or whoever, they would make a point of either marking the spot in some unique way or making a map and a diagram of where it was. And there's several instances of people actually being able days later to go and disinter, you know, the person that they had buried and to bring them somewhere else.
Hi, Kristine.
Hi, honey.
You are being recorded, Mary.
Are you okay?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, being recorded. Sorry. I'm gone.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
That's my wife, Mary, not realizing that recording was going on.
Oh, the temptation to leave
Mary.
that in the final cut, honestly.
Oh, please do.
There you have it, folks. That wasn't a failure of editorial process. That was just the beauty of recording podcasts like this.
That was the beauty of Mary.
Absolutely. It was completely ignoring everything. I'm trying to sort of wave her to go away.
So let's try and take it back to tourism and the history behind this, shall we? So at what point do we see people making trips to the battlefield to observe the history? Because there's a contrast to be struck here between sheer rubbernecking, you know, something significant happened nearby, let's go see what we can see, versus people recognizing that there's an interest in the significance and the impact of what had actually happened there for wider history and for wider contemporary events initially. So at what point do you see that transition starting to happen?
I would actually say it was quite quick, and it's quite difficult to actually split it. Because although you've got that sort of initial sort of range of people going there for various reasons we talked about, we've also got the tourist angle starting up pretty quickly. You've actually got sort of people appearing from London within weeks, in fact, even days sometime, actually to see the place and picking up supposedly eyewitnesses who actually would tour them around the battlefield, etc. Very questionably whether they were actually eyewitnesses in many cases, but certainly that grew very quickly, and certainly within another 10 years at least, the latest, there was actually masses of people who were actually traveling over from London on organized tours, etc.
Yeah, so it was like a Cook's tour.
Absolutely, yeah. It really took off very quickly, and it very quickly became part of the European tour that the young gentleman did. One of the places you just had to go was Waterloo. It went onto the list very quickly.
And Edward Cotton was the one who started the first museum.
Yes,
and he had fought in the battle, and he married a local woman, and set up an inn there, and he hosted tours of the battlefield, and he also had a Waterloo museum. And when he died in somewhere around 1850, and then his niece took it over for about 20 years until her death.
Am I right in thinking he was initially buried at Hougoumont before being moved?
He was, yes.
Up to the new, is it a crypt that they've got in Brussels? I can't think of the right word for it. Mausoleum isn't quite the word I'm looking for. But...
Yeah, it is effectively a via. But the whole situation with his burial is very strange, because he actually had wished in his will that he was buried there alongside Blackman, who was actually an officer in the Guards who was killed at Hougoumont. Because in fact, in his book, he actually claimed he actually saw Blackman's death, which is all a bit strange because he had no reason to be there at the time. But he did specifically ask to be buried alongside him, which is where they were both originally until they were moved in the 1870s to Avia.
Let's talk about tours, seeing as we're there, and one of the inverted commas early-ish tour guides is none other than our Atty himself, Wellington, does his own tour, albeit for royalty, because, that's Wellington's way. I can imagine the kind of fee that he would have charged for tour guiding at Waterloo would have been quite substantial.
If he could have found the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is that. Shall we start with the ruined my battlefield comment before we get to that tour? Did he actually say it? Was it tongue in cheek? Give us a little bit of a sense of this, because like so many things that Wellington is thought to have said, so much of it can be apocryphal and so much meaning gets incorrectly attributed to it that it's very hard to sift the reality from the myth.
I'm going to defer to Gareth on this.
He undoubtedly did not say it. A certain French gentleman who actually wrote Les Miserables, you may know him, actually put it in his book, along with a number of other stories he'd picked up from the battlefield when he went there many years afterwards. And he actually made this claim for Wellington, and it's completely and utterly has no foundation at all. Because even if you actually go to the state of the battlefield, there's only a very small area where all that earth came from to build the mound. People have this strange idea that it completely obliterated the entire battlefield. It doesn't. It's a specific area that earth was taken from, and you can actually see where that is if you look at the Gordon Monument today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's worth saying.
And I should actually say, obviously, for those who don't know who wrote Les Miserables, the chap I'm talking about is a certain Mr. Victor Hugo. And as I said, he is probably, as I've written in my book, probably responsible for more Waterloo myths than anybody else in history.
Absolutely. Let's just deal with the Lion's Mound first of all. It's 6 feet of earth from the area where the Lion's Mound is across the La Haye. It's not a minuscule proportion of the battlefield, but in the grand scheme of what you're looking at, it is not a vast section. Yes, it does mean that the sunken lane that Victor Hugo loved to talk about and made out as though that was the end of the French cavalry charge. It wasn't. There's one of those myths that's just complete nonsense. So that's gone. What you've got is the second half of it, the bit on the reverse slope.
Yes.
But, I mean, what are you losing there? Okay, so you're losing some of the area where the household brigade charged. You're losing the area where Ompteda was killed and where his KGL boys were cut apart trying to retake La Haye. Yeah. Yes, you're losing one of the areas where the second wave of the Imperial Guard struck, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't change a vast amount. I can't work out the percentages, but it's not a big area. Yes, and then we go on to Victor Hugo. So when I was out there, I was very tempted to pause by the Victor Hugo monument and record the second rant of my trip about monuments out there. The first being the statue of Napoleon that stands on the Allied Ridge. You'll be relieved to hear that I'm not going to go on to that one again. But it's infuriating. I love Victor Hugo's work, cracking book, blinding musical. It's not a piece of history. And the trouble is that it's become absorbed into the history. And it's infuriating. Like this thing that the British supposedly chucked all the bodies of the French down a well. And in fact, some of the French soldiers, when they were still alive, down the well. And then they excavated in, what was it, the 70s, and found a couple 70s of animal bones. It's just things like this that make me so angry. Calm, Zach, calm. I should reach for another cup of tea. Right, so we bashed Victor Hugo on the head. Let's stop digressing it and take it back.
And listen, let's put Sir Walter Scott in there too. He's responsible for a lot too.
Right. Because Wellington actually had a problem with all of the amateurs, as he called them, when he was talking about all the poets and the sort of the writers that went there and actually tried to sort of come up with some fantastic poem. In fact, I have to say most of them are pretty dreadful. This is the poem Waterloo, and he scorns their attempts basically as being amateurish and really, as you say, adding to the myth, basically, more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, one thing Wellington did say about touring the battlefield, this we know for sure because he wrote it in a letter, was that George IV, who he was taking around the field, had pretty much no reaction to anything, seemed a little bored, until they went to where Paget's leg was buried. And then George IV burst into tears. And that was the only enthusiasm Wellington saw all day in the king.
Well, this was exactly where I was going to go.
Whatever he was at the time.
This is exactly where I was going to go with it, because George, he's managed to convince himself that he was actually there at Waterloo, hasn't he? So, I mean,
he's claimed that in public and at a dinner table where the Duke of Wellington was seated.
But Wellington's not one to take this kind of, excuse the profanity here, but utter crap. So, I mean, if anybody else had said it, he would have given them the most withering of rebukes that you could possibly imagine. So how does he kind of deal with that? Because it must drive him absolutely mental.
He said, "If you say so, sir."
Exactly.
Is what he said. I mean, everybody sitting at the table knew that he was a lunatic and he was never there. Why go into it, you know?
Yeah. A very diplomatic answer as far as I think as Wellington's concerned.
If you say so.
I have to point out, he does also say that when George IV went to the actual battlefield, he actually did seriously overindulge and was actually bedridden for 2 days before he got himself dragged out of bed to go to the battlefield. That might have something to do with the fact that, that might indicate partly why he didn't get much reaction on him there. He was in a terrible state.
Oh, he was always in a terrible state.
Yeah.
Damning commentary there from Kristine. I love it.
Well, poor Wellington was at the beck and call of Prinny, every day. And so he would say, "Come down to Windsor. I need you. Come to Brighton. Come. I can't do without you." And poor Artie would, ride, because he rode more than he ever rode in a carriage. So he'd ride all those miles to Windsor or Brighton or wherever it was, only to find that Prinny had taken so much laudanum and he drank so much brandy that he was incoherent and nothing got done. So he got back on his horse and went back to London. I mean, it was infuriating.
Yeah. I don't think he was too happy with the fact that the Prince Regent also Frenchified the British uniforms at the time.
Yes, well, he wouldn't, would he? The other thing I was going to say is, Kristine, don't hold back, let it all out. Let us know what you really think about the guy.
Well, if you put him and Mrs. Cunningham together, they led Wellington on a merry dance for decades. So don't get me started. You know how I feel about Artie. I'm always going to have his back.
Quick, Zach, drag it back to tourism. We talked about how the early kind of phase of it develops with the British veteran that we just talked about. But where does it go from there? How do we kind of go from that to the situation that we see today, where people are kind of taking people out under their own steam or as part of bigger initiatives? And I'm not kind of asking you there to go on a history of tourism since the 19th century, but specifically within the context of Waterloo, what are the kind of the shifts and the moments? Does the push to get the battlefield protected have a significance within that story?
That push is only recent. There was a whole gap of time there, decades worth, where nobody really cared anymore about the Battle of Waterloo, and people weren't rushing there to see it. And so it was, in a way, forgotten and allowed to be desecrated, in my opinion. We're so lucky that today we still have what's left there, because it all could have gone.
No, you're right. I mean, but you have to bear in mind, and Europe had seen a terrible war in 1418, and I think that's really when Waterloo drops out of the system, because until 1914, they're writing about it constantly. It's the big war that's happened. In fact, it was known as the Great War to Victorians and Edwardians. And suddenly 1914-18 happens and it pales into insignificance. And unfortunately, then you're quite right, Kristine, it actually sort of, it gets forgotten about and trashed almost. Thankfully, the only good thing that happened is in 1914 is the Belgians actually passed an act to at least sort of keep the battlefield as it was in 1914, just before the war came about, ready for the 100th anniversary, which of course didn't happen because other things were happening in 1915. But at least they managed to stop the rot at that point, because it could have been a lot worse.
Yes. Well, I think that's fascinating too. And a lot of people don't realize that in the Great War, the World War I, it was a battlefield again, or at least saw a lot of troop movement.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I just dig a little bit in terms of what you said about desecration there? Are we talking about things like the building on the Allied left flank? The name's just dropped out of my head, which is deeply embarrassing, but the one on the road down to Papelotte and Le Hay. Or are you talking about sort of other things entirely? Are we talking about, people going in and sort of digging there?
It's like let's take Hougoumont, which was, almost in a derelict state before it was, taken under somebody's wing and redone. The trees were left, nobody took care of the trees, which were, it sounds stupid, but it was so important, that orchard. Maybe if people paid more attention to it over the decades, they could have kept more of that. And it was just allowed to go to rack and ruin, right, Gareth?
Yeah. I mean, well, it was the problem I think you've got is the fact that they were all still working farms and working farmland, and they were making agricultural decisions. Nobody was saying to them, we need to preserve this place. What they were saying was, it's your farm, you get the best living you can out of it. And that unfortunately allowed people to just decimate parts of the field. But then again, you have to look, because even there is questions over the Duke of Wellington's lands, which he was given at Quatre Bras, which was part of the Great Wood there, which he allowed to have cut down for wood, for people who were allowed to actually go ahead with licenses to cut that wood. So at that time, there wasn't always that same desire and understanding about trying to maintain what you had. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And arguably in relation to Quatre Bras, that's still the case, right? Think about the farm that's currently the site of a major redevelopment. It used to have the battle scars on it. It used to have a monument embedded in one of the walls to the troops who defended it. And now it's been flattened, and they've nearly finished. It's taken them a while because they were flattening the place when I was there in 2019, and they're just finishing the building work now, but that's COVID for you. But it's a major development site, and in a battlefield that in many places isn't particularly picturesque. Certainly when it comes to the crossroads itself, the loss of the farm at Quatre Bras is a huge pity. So it's an ongoing problem. I wondered if when you were talking about desecration, whether we were going to sort of head down the road of the dead, and that whole thing about the plundering of certainly Waterloo as a site for human bones that could then be used as bone fertilizer. Is there anything you want to kind of comment on in relation to that?
Well, you're right. I mean, but it wasn't the only battlefield at this time to get that sort of treatment. All the major battlefields of this period, Leipzig, etc., they suffered from this just carelessness, really, towards the dead, of just thinking, well, this is now bone matter that can be turned into fertilizer for the farms. And during the 1820s, 1830s, companies were paying large amounts of money to governments to actually just empty out all these mass graves to use the bone for this sort of situation. There was no thought about protecting the sort of the bodies of the individuals, should we say, particularly the ordinary soldier, but even some junior officers. Many junior officers in that battle have not got a memorial of any sort. You know, they just went into mass graves as well. So it's not just the men, but I say, but there is that whole thing of not understanding at that time the need to actually to remember the dead. I mean, this comes really, I mean, it starts with the Boer War, probably, for the British, start memorializing individuals. But certainly by 1914, we all know about the Commonwealth war graves, etc. And, you know, it suddenly becomes a big thing to actually memorialize virtually every single soldier on an individual sort of headstone. That was a complete anathema to the, you know, to the sort of to anybody, to be honest, of the period we're talking about. It just wasn't done. Yes, great generals and certain officers would have a plaque put up in their local church, or their family would put something up on the battlefield. But that is a rarity. I mean, if you look at even the battlefield, we only know now of around about 20 actual sites where somebody was buried. You know, even if you look at the high-ranking officers, there are a lot more than 20 that actually died. We don't even know where half of them are. It's a completely different sort of scenario, and it's very difficult to understand that view. But clearly, and I will bring this up now, in a sense, Zach, I don't know if you want me to go with this here or not, but, you know, clearly there has been an issue with regard to a single skeleton, potentially somebody that I was able to actually, with a reasonable amount of sort of certainty, actually identify as a person, is now on show in the museum there. You know, the whole question of whether that is correct, or whether it should have been perhaps a plaster cast of that body instead of it actually being the real body. You know, I have not got too involved in that, because I know the Belgian authorities, who I try to work with reasonably often, are very keen not to go down that road, should we say. But, you know, I've always sort of left it as an open question, without saying too much, should we say.
Yes, it is. And, you know, cards on the table, Napoleonic and Revolutionary War Graves charity that I co-founded last year absolutely looked at that and went, okay, so what's the thinking behind that? And obviously, you know, the stance of the charity is always that, you know, we respect that there are differences of opinions on such things. I have my own very strongly held views on that, and what would have been preferable. But yes, it's a big ethical question that there isn't a finite answer to. But certainly, if, as you kind of said, if those remains related to a soldier of 1914-18 or later, there wouldn't have been this debate. It would have been, without question, a case that that individual would have been given a burial, not necessarily in a marked grave. He could there are various options that you could go with there. And, you know, putting a name onto a headstone isn't necessarily a necessity. I know there's been a discussion about the degree of certainty, but I've had a look at your work, Gareth, and I think you make a very compelling case there about who it is, or who it may be, we should say.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, lots of kind of hedging of bets and carefully worded statements there. But yes, it is a big ethical issue. I have my views, and it's been very interesting as the NRWGC has been kind of gearing itself up and working out its positions and so on, to read about wider work and this ongoing tension about when do you and don't you repatriate remains, when do you give them back to their indigenous communities. And quite often this discussion is about indigenous communities in former colonies, and elements of race kind of being factored in there. And there is no consensus. And this is one of the big challenges, isn't it? To try and work out what should we do with these remains. And whilst I could sit here and confidently state my opinion, fundamentally it is just my opinion. And the charity exists to try and find a solution rather than just kind of sit here and spout my individual stances. But it's a huge it's a huge debate. But thank you for raising that, because it is an example of this ongoing kind of question about the state of modern tourism. And you've bridged beautifully into where I wanted to go next, which is what your take is on the modern tourist situation. And there are a few things that occur to me here. One is that, having just been out to Waterloo to film for a documentary, and talking to a number of the heads of key sites out there, I'm thinking Musée Wellington, I'm thinking Mont Saint-Jean Farm, for example, and talking to the owners and the managers there. And Musée Wellington, I was incredibly saddened to hear that actually what they find is that most people go to Memorial 1815, to the Lion's Mound, because that's on the battlefield.
Yeah.
They don't then take the trip to Musée Wellington, which I think is a massive shame. And in a sense, I think it's a huge pity that some kind of shuttle service isn't run to make that happen. And equally, that's not the Anglo-centric about this. Le Dernier Quartier, always an incredibly quiet site, but hugely important as a place of significance. If you want to stand at a place where fundamental decisions were taken, those are the places to go, and they're hugely atmospheric places as well. So I've waffled enormously there, apologies, but what is your sense about these different places, these sites as points of historical interest, and the delicate balances that need to be struck between engagement, levels of interest, but also preservation, which is the other big challenge here?
I was on a Waterloo tour maybe a decade ago, and we're on the tour bus, and they had taken us to practically every memorial on the battlefield, nothing really of interest. So by the time we went to the 9th one, a friend and myself, we said, we're going to stay on the coach. We've seen enough monuments at this point. And so we're on the coach, and I'm looking around, and I look out the back window, and I see La Belle Alliance. And I said to my friend, am I crazy, or is that La Belle Alliance? It is. We got out of the coach and nobody was there, just the two of us. We went, we poked around, we looked in the courtyard, the whole thing. The organized tour leaders got back with the group on the coach, and we drove away. Nobody mentioned, oh, and by the way, this building we're parked beside here is. So, I think you're going to get out of the battlefield what you put into it. I can go to the beaches of Normandy and appreciate what I'm looking at, but I wouldn't know, because I don't have that kind of, background in that World War II arena. Yeah. But if you're going to go, I think if you're going to go to Waterloo, you're going to have some kind of, interest in it. You will have studied it, and you'll know the significance of certain landmarks. And I don't think it's important for the people who go there without that level of interest. But if you are, then you'll seek these places out. And I don't know, maybe they should have, maybe there's not enough for daily tours. Maybe they should have one day a week where there is a tour bus, and they do take you from site to site and, explain the significance of each and the part that they played in the battle. I don't know. But because there isn't anything like that now, you need to either do your own research or go with a reputable tour company that's going to show you what you need to see and tell you why you need to see it.
I have a number of views on this, and I don't disagree with what you said at all, but I have always seen Waterloo as one of those places where, unless you go with a very good knowledge of what you're going to see, that you come away more confused than when you arrived. Because I think that majority of what is there, and has always been there in the past, all these different events, they literally just confuse you more than what you actually started with, I personally think. And I find the majority of people that come away from it will have only gone to the major center, They will have maybe gone up the mound, which then makes it look as if Waterloo is flat, which it clearly isn't. They might go as far as Hougoumont, because there is a sort of a horse-drawn bus that will take you down there. But that's about as far as they go. But I have to say, on the other side, you have to look at it and also say, well, that's partly possibly because the museums don't coordinate. Now, when you buy the museum pass at the major museum, at one time it included the Wellington Museum. It doesn't anymore. You have to buy that separately. So they're fighting against each other in a sense, because if somebody gets a pass and it says there are 6 museums to go to, Mont Saint-Jean and sort of all the rest of it, the Caillou, etc., then they'll possibly go and have a look at these places. But if they're not on that major pass they've bought at the major museum, half the people either don't know they're there or they don't think they're important, and that's the end of it. As you say, I think it's really important. You see all these places, and particularly, as I say, with the Wellington Museum, I think there's as much importance in going to the chapel across the road, which, really brings it home to a lot of people about, some of the people who are there, and, the numbers of young lives that got lost in this battle.
Absolutely, because it's worth saying that within the church are a whole series of plaques. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's a lot. I was surprised when I walked in there. At just how many are there. And they're not exclusively to the British. You've got French and, crucially, Dutch and Hanoverian and so on there. And that's the point at which you start to appreciate the multinational narrative, because that's something that I'm forever banging the drum about, and it does annoy me. I won't bash my listeners' ears with that one again, but in order to get that appreciation, it's a point at which that really hits home. And I'm absolutely with you. I mean, my personal stance is that every time I go out there, Musée Wellington is my first stop. And you might say, well, that's because you're a Brit and you're biased. And I say, no, that's because if you're coming from Brussels, you're going to pass through Waterloo anyway. So it would be mad not to. And it's absolutely worth it. There may be more on that incoming in the near future, actually, because I'm hoping to interview the president of the museum in a future episode. So there you go, listeners, a little teaser for you for the future. Let's start talking about your tour, though, and I want to start with the personal element here. What were your experiences and reactions the first time you both went out, either individually or together?
You go first.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
I had that same feeling that Gareth described. It was very confusing for me because I wasn't with anybody who could point things out to me and explain it the way Gareth explains it, or really, anybody with more knowledge than I had at the time, which I'm going to say was about 15 years ago, the first time I went there. And I just posted today on Facebook a memory, and it's from 7 years ago when I was there, and it was close to midnight. And at that time, you could walk the battlefield whenever you wanted to. So I did it in the dead of night. And it's just, I think the biggest takeaway for most people is to look at the plains and to look at the battlefield and to look at Hougoumont and all the other structures that are still standing there. And to just imagine the human cost of it, you know, that entire area would have been filled with men and horses and weapons. And it's just monumental when you try to imagine the lives that were lost and the lives that were changed forever, and the memories of all those people. It doesn't matter what side they fought on, you know, they all did their part. And it moves me to think that the people who were, you know, enemies at the time are now forever together on that battlefield. So, I mean, you know that I don't look at the battlefield the way you and Gareth do in a military point of view. So that was my takeaway, that the whole field is really the biggest memorial to all of those who were there. And you have to, when you walk those paths and you walk those fields, it's the human element that you should really keep in mind.
Absolutely.
Rather than what regiment was where. That's my take.
That's extremely well said.
Yeah, and sorry, I was going to say, I fully agree with Kristine. I obviously know the movements of the troops. I've actually had to write books on that subject to try and get rid of some of the myths, etc. But I really come from it from the angle of the soldiers. That's why I started looking for all these unpublished sort of letters and journals, etc., from the battlefield, and started the Waterloo archive series, which actually I should say, Zach, is only up to number 14. I think you mentioned up possibly 20. I think it was 14 and an atlas.
What's going on? You know, that's not good enough, Gareth.
Give him another week.
I know. I do apologize. No, at the moment I'm doing it now, the Napoleonic archive for the rest of the wars, and I think it's about time I did some Peninsular stuff. So I do actually do other things in Waterloo. But coming back to Waterloo now and this sort of situation, you know, when you talk about any part of the battlefield, I don't. And Kristine and I was over there the other month, just thought, you know, going through it all. And I don't spend my time going on about, oh, well, this regiment went here and this regiment went here. You know, that's, you have to put a little bit of that in, but it's more about the personal thing. So, I mean, you know, the story of Hougoumont, for me, is actually told through Private Matthew Clay. And you actually just go through the incident. And in fact, you know, he was the one that actually led me to actually discover the whole second break-in, etc., because I read it and thought, hang on a minute, this is not what everyone thinks he said. He's saying something completely different. So then you can talk the whole battle of Hougoumont, which was in a sense its own little battle on its own, through his eyes, and sort of follow him through it, and actually what went on, and all these discoveries we've made on the back of that. And you can do that for every part of the battlefield. It doesn't have to be, you know, it's not about just buildings and regiments and, you know, so the grand maneuvering, etc. It's the personal aspect. And let's be honest, for most soldiers on that battlefield, you could see probably less than 100 yards for most of it because of the smoke and the confusion and everything else. That was it. It was a personal battle. It was what happened to them and to the people around them, and that's all they knew. And even if they write about anything else, they didn't really know about it until afterwards, and they learned from somebody else.
See, this gives a really nice indication of why I have a particularly large amount of time for both of your works, because what you've picked up on here is the important thing, which is the human story. And whilst there is a degree of interest in being able to say that, you know, First Division was here and went in that direction and all the rest of it, and sure, people go there wanting to understand how these attacks play out, it is that human factor that needs to be placed front and center of this, and to remember the cost and the toll and the impact on human lives and the tragedy that unfolded there. You know, all this thing about glory on battlefields is something that I struggle with quite a lot, because if you're wounded, if you watch your mate being hit by a cannonball, if you see somebody being cut down by a cuirassier or whatever it might be, those are not moments of glory, those are moments of tragedy. And I think what's come across really nicely there is that when people go on your tour, they're going to have that human element put front and center, which is the way that I think it should be done. And I say that as somebody who myself is sort of looking at ideas of tours in various locations, and to hear you guys kind of place that front and center is massively reassuring. And why I would encourage people to go on your tour.
Every stop that we go to on the battlefield, I've picked out something human to say about it, an excerpt from my book, something that somebody wrote or remembered, to keep that human element at every point of the tour. And I think it'll give the people on the tour a greater appreciation of what people went through, whether they were terrified or wounded or victorious or whatever, their point of view, and the aftermath also.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'll be doing something similar, but it's coming out of there somewhere. Because obviously there is so much of it that I'll just pull up a bit, whatever subject it is. But the other thing I always think is important about tours like this, and I always say it at the start, is there are no stupid questions, because people are always afraid to ask things until you sort of say that. And you think, look, I can guarantee if you're wanting to ask something, 3 other people are thinking it, but they won't actually dare ask the question. So please ask it and we'll deal with it as it comes along. And to be honest, that's why every tour I do, as far as I'm concerned, is different, because it goes off in a million different directions because of what the interests are of the people who are there and to help their understanding. There's nothing worse than somebody that just, comes out with the same trite statements all the time, which doesn't really gel with the people who are there. If they're interested in different aspects, let's go down those rabbit holes, with them, and let them really enjoy it without it ruining the group thing. Let them all have their individual rabbit holes and go down every single one of them with them and just do that. It's not impossible to do that, particularly over a long tour like we're doing.
And this is
Gareth and I are looking forward to, not just the tour itinerary during the day, but in the evenings after dinner, we'll all be able to sit around, in a small group and discuss all these questions and research, because a lot of times, there are several published authors who are going on this tour and who write in that period and who are working up to, let's say, the Waterloo chapter of their book. And they have some really, definite research questions that they need answers. And we're really looking forward to that and pointing them in the right direction for further study and, clearing up some aspects and just spending the evening around a nice glass of Doro and discussing these things.
You stick to your Duro. I'll go with the Waterloo beer.
There you go.
What I will say is, somebody put a Waterloo beer in my hand and asked me to talk about Waterloo. Try stopping me.
And this
we have had some good discussions.
And this really nicely points to the value of going with you two, that value of taking a genuine expert on this period, not somebody who's read a couple of books and vaguely knows their way around the key locations, but somebody who has kind of lived and breathed this period for a long period of time, as you both have. Talk us through the itinerary, though. What's the actual plan for these trips? And, when are they going out as well?
Well, the tour starts in London on September 1st. And we're going to all meet that evening at the Clarence Pub in Whitehall, right across from the Horse Guards. And the next day, we're going to kick off with a Wellington/Waterloo walking tour of London. So we're going to do number 4 Hamilton Place, where Wellington left from to go to Paris before Waterloo was even a thought in anybody's mind. We're going to do the Grenadier Pub. We're going to do Apsley House, Horse Guards Museum. And then from that point on, next day we get on the Eurostar and we go across to Brussels. And then I'm going to leave that end of it to Gareth, because he's the one who'll be leading the battlefield tours.
You didn't tell me that. I thought you were going to say something. I'm sure you will.
About the battlefield?
I don't think I'll be able. I don't think I'll be able to keep
but it
you
won't
quiet.
be military.
Yeah, well, no, I agree, but I don't think I'll be able to keep you quiet for 4.5 days. There's no way, Kristine.
No.
I'm guessing. I'm guessing Kristine's
neither
going to
would
say.
I want to.
Yeah, I'm guessing Kristine's going to say more than this is where some fighty stuff happened. You know.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Yeah, there was like horses and a couple of guns, and there was a lot of smoke. And over to you, Gareth.
Yeah, some bangy stuff, and that's it.
You know what's interesting is occasionally fiction authors will get in touch with me and say, "Hey, I'm looking to put this in my water. Could this possibly have happened?" And I'm sure Gareth will agree with me. Anything could have happened on that battlefield.
Yeah.
You had people who were, just there for the show. You had people who somehow got separated from their regiments. You had, the stuff that was going on was incredible. Anything went. And that's the kind of points that Gareth and I want to bring up, not just the strictly tactical things, but the kind of confusion and the blockage on the roads, and really paint a picture of what was going on.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll even disagree at times.
Never. That's why we have Mary to referee.
Oh, that's true. Yes. Mary, my wife, will be there as well as a helper, should we say. But what I would say as well, obviously going into the battlefield area, we obviously will do them all. We'll do all the major museums. We'll do Quatre Bras. We'll do Ligny as well for one day. But obviously the major thing is Waterloo. We'll do all the other bits and pieces, but then it'll culminate, as far as I'm concerned, with the most important day of the lot. Sorry, Kristine, is actually the walking the battlefield day. Because until you walk the battlefield, you don't really get to feel it. It's something that I did a few times previously, but had to do in 2013, ready for the sort of my book coming out for the anniversary, the children's anniversary. And I discovered so much more new stuff that I hadn't even realized myself until then, just by walking around for 3 days. And yes, we're not doing it for 3 days, but I can now go to the major points and actually, sort of identify these things for you. And you can really see how this really is undulating country and has huge dips and sort of heights and everything else, which you don't expect to get. Because it's portrayed almost like almost like it was a billiard table, which it certainly is not. And it has a major effect on lots of things that happen on that day. And I just find it fascinating, and I find that most people that do walk around it do really get a real feel for it after that. And you still bring in all these other bits and pieces about localities and people and what happened to them at those points. But I do feel that is almost that final day before we go back is that day when it all will click into place. I'm absolutely certain of it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's worth saying that multiple trips out there are actually needed to get that level of understanding of the ground. For me, having been out there twice now, I'm picking up things and noticing things that I didn't pick up the first time, and I'm sure that will be the case on the third and the fourth and the fifth visit out there. That unless you've got somebody who's really kind of familiar with this ground, you keep actually making new discoveries and so on, and that's part of the fun of it. So this is going to be incredibly exciting. Obviously you're doing it properly. That's the important thing to say here. You're doing Quatre Bras, Ligny, and so on. You're doing all of the museums. For those who can't kind of get why that's a big deal and why people don't tend to do that, how visitor friendly would you say the whole region is? And that's not to say that transport links aren't good, because they are. You can get very easily to Braine-l'Alleud, get very easily and cheaply to Waterloo from Brussels. But in terms of from there, moving on to these key locations, how easy would you say it is, and what tips would you give people?
Gareth.
Oh, okay. Well, to be perfectly honest, unless you've got your own transport, it is not brilliant. Yes, there are trains to Waterloo and Braine-l'Alleud, which is close by, but then you try and get any form of vehicle to take you from there. As I know you've had a situation recently, Zach, with sort of trying to get from the station to the actual battlefield. It's only a few miles, but it can be incredibly difficult to get there. Buses can also move down there, but that's Waterloo. As soon as you start talking about Quatre Bras and Ligny, there is virtually nothing. If you haven't got your own transport, you're wasting your time. It's too far to walk, and you literally there's no other way of doing it. And in those situations, realistically, Quatre Bras is becoming a difficult battlefield to actually show, because it is becoming extremely built up. It is very busy, and we've had to work hard at finding locations to actually show the battlefield with any sense of being able to do so over the traffic noise, etc. Ligny is a sprawling battlefield, which is a problem. Has a very good museum, but other than that, a few locations, and other than that, it's quite difficult again. But you can get a feel for those battles from picking the right spots. Waterloo is, as I say, is different, but it still has its own problems in the sense of that it's all centered around that spot on the battlefield, and it always has been, unfortunately, ever since the mound was built and the buildings around it. That has become the focal point of everything that everyone goes to, and getting them to walk further afield, and it's not that far. I mean, half a mile or so, or 3/4 of a mile, you're across the battlefield, and you get a very different perspective of it. But very few people do it, and as I'm saying, it's. But at least with Waterloo, you still, despite, as I said, that little bit of ground which has been messed about with, the great part of the battlefield is virtually what it was, and you can really feel for it and understand what went on, and that's the great thing. But certainly the other two are a bit more challenging.
Absolutely, and it's worth saying, folks, that if you are going to try and do it under your own steam, I would urge you to go with the tour guide. But if you are going to do it under your own steam, you're going to find that there are places where you can't take a car. If you're going to try and do it really properly yourself and put all the maps down, and believe me, having worked it all out, it took me a solid fortnight with maps and so on to try and work out exact locations and all the rest of it and cross-reference. If you're going to do that, you will get there and find that actually you can't drive on all of these roads because they're private property, or they're just not passable because they're dirt tracks, not proper roads. So be prepared to walk and take some serious walking shoes with you. Your standard trainer or flip-flops are not going to cut it. You will suffer for it. This has been fantastic.
The other thing I will say on that, Zach, is that you can still do. I wouldn't like to frighten people off who are not able to walk as much.
Yeah, that's true.
Certainly we will be looking at this, is that we will have a bus with us that's moving us around. And obviously, even when you're doing the walk, you can actually, if needs be, take people to the next location that we're going to talk, and they don't have to walk it, because not everybody has got the ability to do all that walking. So, I don't want to frighten people off in that way either, and say that, alternatives are available, but clearly you're right. There are places you can't get to, but certainly there are enough places you can get to.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
means that people can enjoy the thing without actually thinking, oh, if I can't walk, 10 miles in a day, it's not worth me doing it. Well, that's not true. Yeah. I mean, if I walk Kristine for 10 miles in a day, I think I'll probably be killing her. So we won't be doing that. It'll only be a few miles with lots of stops. And I say, and we can also get people to go on a bus, go to that next stop, and we can meet them there if they want to. It's okay. You don't get all of the feeling for it, but you get 99% of it. And I think, it's just important to bring that in.
No, I'm glad you did make that point. What I would say, just to caveat what I've said, folks, is that I'm somebody who can't walk long distances. If you make me walk for a solid half hour, at the end of it, I'm going to be screaming expletives in your ear, such as partly my nature, but also how my body kind of functions. So you can do it, absolutely, you can. And it's important that you emphasize that, Gareth. So thank you. But be prepared for this idea that it's not going to be plain sailing, and therefore you want the expertise with you, because you want people who've recce'd the ground, who've worked out where are the locations to get the maximum impact, and then you will get the proper appreciation in the smallest amount of time without rushing things, but also kind of maximizing your time out there. Yeah. Gareth, Kristine, this has been an absolute joy. We're going to put the link to your tour in the description to this episode. The first one goes out in early September. You guys are back in time for War and Peace 2, which is fantastic news. I look forward to hopefully seeing you there. Hashtag ad folks, more details on that from the Napoleon Revolutionary War Graves charity website coming very soon. But crucially, because we need to emphasize that, you know, we're here to talk about your tour, this won't be the only one. So what's the plan beyond September? When are you guys going out again?
We haven't discussed it. What do you think, Gareth? I don't know.
Well, all we've done is we've sort of said that we would obviously like to do this again, possibly annualize it, or if there's more interest, we can do more. But I'm certainly up for it. Kristine is, very interested in doing so, because obviously it's her company as such. But, and obviously there's always the opportunity to do others. I have, for example, done a very successful and very interesting tour around Copenhagen for 5 days, looking at the 1801, 1807 actions. And, I would love to do that again. So there's plenty of other areas for us to look at in the future if there's any interest behind it.
We will discuss.
Absolutely. So folks, I would emphasize, check out the website. If you've got something particular in mind, get in touch. This idea that tour guides aren't going to do anything other than what's advertised isn't necessarily the case. Bespoke tours can be put together. Obviously, there are overheads attached with that. But if you've got an enthusiasm and you want to go out with these guys, ask the questions and you'd be amazed at what the answers can sometimes turn out to be. Gareth, Kristine, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy. Please do come back again sometime very soon. And thanks for your time today.
Zach. I look forward to seeing you at the conference in September in London.
Hello again, folks. Yes, I know, the usual ever so slightly tedious begging letter. As always, please remember to like and subscribe. Little things that make a colossal difference. It's the algorithm that drives how widely these episodes are spread, and your inclination to like the posts on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. That willingness to hit the share button, to take that link and copy it into your own social media feeds, those are the kinds of things that make a colossal difference in terms of wider reach and bringing in new people who can enjoy this show. And if you're enjoying it, then it would be great for other people to share that enjoyment with you. So please do take the time to spread the word. I'm conscious that a number of people who, with the best will in the world, I don't even know, are being very kind and doing that kind of thing. If you're one of those, then believe me, heartfelt thanks to you. Those of you who aren't, if you can spare the time, please do. It takes a few seconds and a little bit of electricity. It makes a massive difference. But the most important thing, there's a subscribe button. Just whack that, and then you'll be able to get live updates whenever the next episode goes out. As you know, this is a show that endeavours to run on a shoestring budget, so if you are willing and able to contribute, either as a one-off or as something kind of more regular, please know that it makes a massive difference. All the funds get reinvested, so none of this is about lining my own pocket. It's all about how can we kind of build the show and look to provide fresh content, but also more diverse content. So the big thing that I'm looking at for the future is how to launch a YouTube channel successfully, and considering some kind of live stream capability and what that might or might not look like. No promises at this stage. The other thing I would say is that if you want more content, if you're able to contribute to the Patreon scheme, it does help in terms of trying to reach that goal of ultimately going weekly. That is what I would like to do. Have one of these go out every single week, 52 in a year. But these are huge investments of time. Even when an episode isn't 4 hours long, like some of the ones you've had recently,
It takes a good 4 hours per episode, absolute minimum, probably close to 6 in terms of editing and preparation and recording time and so on and so forth. Obviously, I am sitting here playing the world's smallest violin, but if you enjoy the show and if you would like more content, please do consider whether or not you're able to contribute. I know times are hard. There are links in the description. Go to Patreon if you're considering something regular on a monthly basis. The idea with that is that there are different tiers. They start at £1 a month, go up all the way up actually to £25 a month for those who are insanely generous. And you get different perks within each tier. So you can get shout-outs within episodes, you can get one-to-one meetings with me, voting rights to determine themed months. Marshall patrons, for example, can actually demand episodes. So if any of that is of interest to you, please do consider whether or not you would like to become a patron. Equally, a one-off tip can be made via Ko-fi. And whatever support you're able to offer, I am massively grateful, as I'm sure you know. A particular shout out to my Emperor level patrons Mark Stoos, JC Kaiser and Todd and Laird Campbell. My Marshall patrons Matt Bone, Marcus Cribb and Rachel Stark. My Commander patrons John Haynes, Ger Brown, Liam Telfer, Jane Davis, Bob Burnham, Andy Meakin, Michael Guest and Graham Swidenbank. And my mentioned in Dispatches patrons M. Duck, Anthony Gumbow, Chris Pramus, Miles Reedy, Alexandra Leon, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Beatrice de Graaf, Brendan Teeling, Colin Fieldhouse, Ed Koss, Bruins Girl, Gareth Copeland, Jeff Maple, Hugh Brennan, Indiana Fats, Jim Deary, Jim Getz, Josh Keeney, Lucy Tatner, Lynn Dawson, Mark Dewhurst, Mark Anscombe, Rob Griffith, Roy Muir, Ross Flowers, Ryan Diamond, Rob Cothlan, Mark Trowbridge, Nick Overland, Stephen Coulson and Graham Goodwin. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been The Napoleonicist. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.
Even on a budget, quality is non-negotiable. That's why Quince is the place to score high-end essentials at 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Get your hands on buttery soft cashmere sweaters from just $60, Italian leather jackets, and so much more. And the best part about Quince, they exclusively partner with factories committed to safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Elevate your style without the elevated price tag with Quince. Go to quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns.